Shabbat Shalom. First of all, Yashikol, Kansas Joe, we're thrilled to have you here again with us. And thrilled to have everybody here. And we wish a Yashikol to Jacob and Rochelle for participating so beautifully, but most importantly, teaching every one of you for coming to make the meeting this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned earlier a very important concept of Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. How wonderful it is for brothers to sit together, to dwell together. It's actually a selection from the book of Psalms, from the book of Tehillim, Psalm 133, and it's actually referred to as only 15 Psalms are out of the 150. It's referred to as a Shir Lama'alot, a psalm of ascent. Idea being that if in fact we can ever attain the goal of Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, trust me, it will take some work. As I like to say to people, I always ask folks when considering this idea and reading about this tension between Yosef and his brothers, I always ask the question, you don't have to answer, I'm not putting you on the spot, and it's not being video recorded. How many of you here have a family member with whom, either in the present or in the past, you have had a time of which you were not speaking to one another, and most hands go up? So, ladies and gentlemen, the concept of Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad is sometimes very tricky. We read about it today. We'll read about it in even more detail next week. So I was thinking to myself, because I wanted to focus specifically on the strife between Yosef and his brothers. Never mind that I don't speak to my first cousin. Never mind that I don't speak to my sister-in-law, but the idea is even more profound when you think of the idea if somebody was in the position where they didn't speak with their siblings. And so I want to take a moment to think about what is it that causes this well-known strife that's referred to as sibling rivalry. In a number of studies, you guys don't have sibling rivalry, do you? Work it out before January 20th. In any event, if I were to look at recent psychological studies, they would suggest the following primary causes for sibling rivalry. Number one is age difference. When there's a sibling that's much older and or much younger than the other, it can be a source of tension. And when we read about the story of Joseph, we are told, if you recall, Ki ben zekunim hu lo, that one of the reasons that he's favored by his father is because this is the son of his old age. We are told that another cause of sibling rivalry is parental favoritism. And again, if we were to look back on the life of Yosef, this is starting to resonate with people. If we are to think about the life of Yosef, it says, Yisrael ahava Yosef mikol banav ve'asa lo ketona pasim. That his father Jacob loved him more than the other children. And actually, by the way, he even displayed it outwardly by making for him a ketonet pasim, or in English, what do they call that in English? The Technicolor Dreamcoat. So those are two sources. And again, it is part of the history of Yosef. Sibling jealousy in crisis can sometimes form emotional breaks within cultural contexts that are somewhat irrevocable. When we first read of the relationship between Yosef and his brothers, we read the following. And again, this is after the Ketona Pasim, after the gift of the coat of Benekos. It says, Vayisneu oto, they hated him. Now, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that is very strong language to find in the Torah. Not only does it say Vayisneu oto that they hated him, but then it says a few sentences later, Vayosifu od senoto, and they hated him even more. It's unbelievable to read that type of emotional reaction in a Torah text. Simply speaking, we don't generally receive such descriptions. We do also read by Kanu Oto that they were incredibly jealous of him. We're told in these psychological researches that stresses in the home can lead to sibling rivalry due to the formation of insecure attachments, which lead to anxiety and prone the person towards anger. And again, Yosef's story is exactly like that. We read about his brothers earlier in the text when they couldn't even speak peacefully to him. So we have a situation which is very, very amiss. And today, in today's Torah portion, Yosef's brothers finally descend to Egypt. He recognizes them, if you recall, but they don't recognize him. As I mentioned earlier, we have to think also about the passage of time. This is 20 years later. He was 17 when he was thrown into the pit. You can imagine a young teenager who is now raised in a different context. It's 20 years later. He looks a little different. He's matured, certainly. The tradition tells us that he also dresses like an Egyptian. He has an Egyptian name. He fixes his hair as is the Egyptian style. So it's somewhat understandable that they don't immediately recognize him. Yosef, on the other hand, is staring at 10 brothers together. And depending on whether or not you're hanging out in Brooklyn, you probably don't know a lot of families that have 10 siblings. God bless the religious Jews. It's a beautiful thing. So, ladies and gentlemen, so the question is, what's the difference? I want to ask, what's the difference between vayaker, to know somebody, and to not recognize them? And what's really fascinating, I found something very unique when going through the text. And I want you to listen to the sentence for a minute. It says, Vayar Yosef et Echav vayakirei. That Yosef saw his brothers, vayakirei, and he recognized them. And then it says the following, Vayit naker aleichem, and then he made himself not known to them. He hid himself from them. What struck me is in terms of philology, and that is the actual development of the word. Why should the word to know somebody and to hide from them be so closely aligned? Both in Hebrew have the shorish, the root nun kaf resh. Nakir. It can either mean to know somebody, to be familiar with them, or to actually actively hide from them. So I want to point out that in Hebrew, that same word, when used as a noun, means nochri, is referring to somebody who's not Jewish. Nochri, that's a biblical term. However, a nochri is still considered close to us. They're not considered as if they were part of the 7 Canaanite tribes, and therefore there's an inherent closeness. What is suggested is that whether we like it or not, Yaker and Naker and Nochri and myself are all more similar than dissimilar. Yosef, as much as he tries, he can't really hide himself from his brothers. He just can't. They share a history, they share values, and they share ideas in Hashem together. Is it possible that the people that we think we really don't know are people who we actually know much more than we think we know? It's something to really think about in our day and age. When we talk about strife and tension in the world, there is sometimes a very small difference between somebody being familiar to you and somebody acting as if they don't know you at all. And I think for the Jewish people, This difference between yakir and nakir, to be known and to be familiar with versus actively hiding from them, is something that we need to think about. So what's our part? Our part, I would suggest to you, is that when we become part of a dynamic that suggests sibling rivalry, and we can extend that to other members of our Jewish community, to the world at large, that what we have to remember is that actually we are all connected. We can try to hide from one another, but ultimately, we are all in life together. We're all going through struggles in life. We all have triumphs in life. We all have our 5 minutes of glory, and we also have our 5 minutes of difficulty. And typically, if we can see within one another the concept of B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all created in God's image, then perhaps that is a way to reduce the tension in the world. Tomer Devorah, a 16th century Musar Kabbalistic work, suggests the following that I want you to think about. It says, Kol haneshamot klulos bo, that all of the souls in the world, and certainly in that context, he's talking about the Jewish souls, we are deeply connected. We've experienced that firsthand over the last couple of months. It says, Yesh b'chelet zeh, v'yesh bo b'chelet zeh. There is a part of me in you, and there is a part of you in me, because really we are one neshama. We are one soul. And that might be true also if we think about families, right? So even if I don't speak to my brother or my cousin or whatever the case may be, and even if I want to hide myself, ultimately there is a sense of closeness, a sense of familiarity, and a sense of a joint mission in the world that we all share. We share it when we come from the same family. We share it as part of Am Yisrael. I think the difference of being familiar with somebody and hiding ourselves from them, as the word suggests, can sometimes be very, very minimal. And perhaps it's up to us, when we do not receive a response, to double down our efforts, to work harder, to bring brothers and sisters, Jews and non-Jews, together in a closer and more meaningful way. It is that way we will be able to, that we will be able to repair the world into a better place. And God willing, it could be this week. God willing, it will be tomorrow, that we will truly be able to say together, Hine, Matov, Umanayim, Shevet, Achim, Gam, Yachad. Shabbat Shalom.